Hello and welcome to another episode of Who Knew in the Moment, the podcast. I'm your host, Phil Friedrich, and today I am honored to have Blake Mallen with me. Blake is a TEDx speaker, has over 1 million views, so go check that out. He's the founder of multiple different companies, and now one of his most recent adventures that he's doing is in the venture capital angel investing world. And one of the things that I think is super interesting that you're hear a lot throughout his story is he has kind of a phrase and a mantra that is live life for your goals, don't follow the script. And we're going to get into that. So Blake, thanks so much for being on today, brother.
Excited to be here, Phil. I appreciate the invite. And I know this is really the first time we've had a chance to meet and connect and learn a little bit about you as well. So, thank you for the time and excited to be here.
You betcha. So to kick off your journey and your story, your parents have good jobs, but we would say more like traditional type jobs. So talk a little bit about growing up in that world and seeing one design of what life can be like.
Yeah, for sure. So I'm actually in my home office here in Southern California. So I'm in Pacific Palisades. For those of you guys that don't know, that's kind of between Santa Monica and Malibu. But yeah, SoCal native, born and raised. So I grew up about 45 minutes north of here. And I think you and I kind of share a similar background in that our parents were public service. So my mom was a lifelong educator. So most of my childhood growing up, she was a teacher. And then went on to be a counselor and then eventually a principal. And my dad was career law enforcement. And normally when people let that sink in, they're like, oh, a principal and a cop as parents. Yes. So that is the glimpse into my upbringing. And that pretty much sums up traditional, to say the least. Great people, always supportive, learned about hard work, high values, high character. But when it comes to anything outside the box, entrepreneurship, business, a lot of the changes and shifts that are happening today was definitely not in my household or at my dinner table conversations for sure.
Yes. Now, something additionally that isn't necessarily unique to you, but it is important, I think, in some life skills that you learn is you had a passion for sports, and baseball was one of them, and water polo as you got older. So talk a little bit about how playing sports and building that competitive bone, if you will, helped you in life there.
That's an interesting question. I've never been asked that on a podcast. You've done your homework. I think you must have been an athlete then. You played sports growing up?
I did. Yeah. My whole life, and basketball was mine, but I can respect a good baseball and water polo player.
Yeah, no, it's interesting. And I smile now because I have two littles. So my daughter Sadie is 4. My son is 7. So they're in the ages now where I'm getting to actually like relive the whole entry into team sports as the dad, right?
Yeah.
As the dad, and I'm just smiling. Like, so my son, we just, we had our first soccer season. We had our first basketball season. We're in the middle of baseball season right now, and here in the Palisades, like, I mean, it's a thing. Like we showed up, to tryouts at 7 years old, where they had the stopwatch and they were clocking their 50-yard sprint times for my 7-year-old, and I'm not making this up. And it's a blast. I'm smiling because it's the first time I've been asked that question, and now I have a lens of two perspectives, myself and now watching and living and experiencing it through my son. So it's fascinating. And when you end up having kids, it causes a different vantage point, right, or a different perspective point, not just on what they're going through and wanting to be the best, right, in terms of a parent, but it actually, at least for me, it causes me to reflect and go back on my experiences when I was their age through like an entirely different lens, right? Or entirely different set of perspectives. So it's fascinating. But yeah, I grew up playing, I guess, all sports. I feel like, I don't know if this is true. I feel like for my generation, I'm an older millennial. I got a little bit of the gray hair coming in. I'm the gray hair millennial. Older than you, I'm sure. And I feel like, at least I grew up in a suburbia. Cul-de-sacs, often quoted as like one of the safest towns in America. I mean, it's pretty white picket fence. Not middle class. I was average middle class, right, workers, but definitely an environment where I feel like we played outside a lot. And it was common to go down to the baseball fields, and play, right? And sports were just a part of growing up. And I feel like that was for everybody. In hindsight, that may not be the case, but yeah, I played baseball age 5 all the way through high school. I played basketball a whole bunch of seasons. I even ran. I was fast when I was a kid. I tried track and running for a while. I then got into swimming because I in Southern California. One of my passions, Phil, is I love to surf. I grew up and shifted surfing. So I got into swimming because I felt might happen with my surfing. And then when we got into swimming, well, water polo was just more fun than swimming and chasing walls back and forth. They gave us a ball to play with, and we got to, get some competitive spirit in the water. And, we did it because it made us better surfers and we had some fun. And so, yeah, I played a lot of sports. And in hindsight, I think you learn a lot of valuable lessons. I do. I think, yeah, competition, I think that can be a very positive drive. It can also be the opposite, depending on how you apply that. But I think learning how to be a competitor, I think the discipline, I remember getting up and having to go to school before school.
Yeah.
And yeah, we wore the Speedos and the funny caps on the water polo team, like putting that on when it was freaking freezing, jumping in the water, right, at early in the morning, and then having to go through the rest of the days, smelling like chlorine, no matter how much we took a shower, it just wouldn't come off, but like over and over and over and over and over again. And I look at the discipline and the habits that got built during those early years, learning what it felt like to win, learning what it felt like to lose, learning how to take feedback and I wouldn't call it criticism, but critiques, right, from coaches in a way that wasn't negative. It wasn't failure. It wasn't like you did something wrong, but from a spirit of better, of improvement, of progress, of growth. I can keep going, and I've never answered that question this way, but I answer that now again because I watch my son entering all of this, and I find myself stepping into that role and like teaching him these principles and watching like the emotion of roller coaster when they win a game as 7-year-olds, and then like the utter defeat and failure when they lose.
Yes.
And the feedback of when you try to tell them something and they take it personally. And yeah. So, I think there's a lot of lessons that come from growing up in a sporting environment, in a team environment, that you do and can apply to not just business, but can apply to life. And yeah, I feel like more kids these days, and again, it might be a perception, but I see so many parents that are like locking their children into one thing so early, because if they don't play year round this or that and have the personal coaching and the private mentor and go all in, now they're not going to be on the traveling team, year-round team, all-star team, this team, that team, and they're not going to get their full ride scholarship to the Division I school and be pro by the time they're 18 type of expectation.
Yes.
I feel like a lot of kids might be missing that breadth of experience and breadth of knowledge. Just a personal opinion, but yeah, I don't know if that's what you're looking for, but that's my reflection and kind of what I'm experiencing now, reliving it right here with my my kids.
I love it. I love it. And it's funny that you kind of went through that progression of, man, if you don't start at 7, doing all this and this and this, then you'll never get there. Because similarly in your life, you kind of were told that or felt that about school. Hey, in the younger years, it was like, well, if you don't pass this class with an A, then you won't get into this, and then you won't be able to do honors, and then you won't get into the university. And you talk about that. And so to kind of go through that part of life for you, once again, having a parent that's in education, there's always going to be a very, high standard set in front of you, and you excelled and you hit those standards and probably exceeded them. And that opened up opportunity for you to go to college. But there was also this, I don't know, kind of piece of you that you're like, man, is this really all that there is just kind of hitting this mark? So talk a little bit about the educational side for you, and then the invite that you receive in college for a business opportunity.
Yeah. It's interesting. I don't think I'm any different than anybody. And Phil, I say that having been blessed through my endeavors and through, a lot of what I've done in the past to get a chance to travel around the world. I've stood on stages in, I don't know, dozens of countries, hundreds of thousands of people, literally. And I've asked the same question, purely out of curiosity, right? Out of self-reflection on the path that I was on, and like, am I really different?
Yeah.
is this a me thing? Is it an America thing? Is it a world thing? And I've kind of come to the conclusion, and for those of you guys that are listening, you can tell me if I'm aligned and if you agree. We're all given some sort of script. Like we are literally given a script, meaning like a prescription almost for like how to live a successful life.
Yeah.
And pretty much everyone I've asked and everywhere in the world, and I talk about this in the TED Talk you mentioned when I got a
Yes.
chance to stand on that red dot, which was a super cool experience, and share something that I was just fascinated by and passionate by. This is what I spoke about because
Yeah.
the script is the same. It's a universal. It's what do you have to do to be happy and successful? Well, age 5, you go to school, study hard, you get good grades, you follow the rules, you keep studying hard, you get good grades, so you get into good college, so you can get more better grades. So in many households, you go to more school and get the acronym after your name. So eventually you can get the good high paying job where you want to work hard, you don't call in sick, and you climb that ladder, right? You meet the right person and fall in love and get married and have 2.2 kids before the age of 35 and buy the house and get the mortgage and keep working hard and save that money. And eventually you retire. Like we have all heard that in various forms.
Yes.
And been given that like as an expectation or a prescription for like, this is just what you're supposed to do. And I'm just fascinated that script has held for so long through so many generations now and has transcended geography, culture, language, all over the world. Even though today, if you were to stop most people and say, well, is that true?
Yeah.
Does that still work? Is that actually the equation that the people that are, forget the most successful and happy and fulfilled, like living life, the people you look to and they're like, that's a person, not a person whose bank account you want. That's a person whose life I want, right? Like the whole package. And is that the script they followed? Was that the mold? And I think most people today in an actual pause moment, like reflection moment, they'll be like, well, no.
Yeah.
Yet we still propagate the script, right? And we still follow the script, and we're all stuck. It doesn't matter if you're, the boomer listening or the millennial listening or the Gen Z, or like, we're all still operating from the expectation that was given to us when we were like my son Jay's 5, 6, 7, 10, 12.
Yeah.
We don't realize that we're literally still running off programming that was given to us so long ago. And most people never stop and actually reflect and review and audit it and edit it and update it. So that's definitely the story. And I found myself following that to a T. And I think the moment maybe you're referencing, it was my summer after my freshman year of college or my sophomore year. And I was doing exactly like you said. I was literally just building the resume. Yep. What do I need to do in order to put the right bullet on my resume so when I graduate my university, I can get into the law school? And like, it was literally, that was it. And I was interning for a district attorney. And I was just like super frustrated, super miserable, not having fun, but I was doing it because it's what I thought I was supposed to do. And then I had a mentor in my life that probably sensed that I was just not happy.
Yeah.
And he just asked a really simple question. He's like, well, why are you doing it? And that was a big turning point in my life, one of those moments, because I just didn't have an answer. My only answer was, well, isn't this what I'm supposed to do?
Wow.
And as simple as that may sound, Phil, that awareness, it was like a slap in the face, the punch in the gut. It was wait, am I really dedicating my life? Because that's what time is, right? I mean, it's all I have is like my life, to following things for no better reason than someone somewhere sometime told me I was supposed to do this. And anyway, that was a moment. It didn't change everything for me dramatically, but what it did change is the lens or the filter of which I started to look at things and ask questions and not just take things because it's the way they've always been done or the way someone else said it needed to be done, but just started to really, really re-ask that question. Like, well, why? Is that really what I want? Is that really why I'm here? Is that really the path that's meant for me. And I try to, it's hard, now again, going through, I watch my son, he's in first grade, and I find myself on autopilot sliding into the same expectation, being the guy that like stood on the TED Talk and talked about and created awareness about, like, this isn't it, being a guy that like my life is actually a story of the opposite. Yet I find myself doing the same thing by like osmosis, and I got to remind myself, no, right? And it's just interesting. It's fascinating, and I don't think it's a me thing. I think it's a world thing, and I think those that are listening, you can take something for that. Like, what script are you following? Who gave it to you? When? Is it the right one? Have you questioned it? Why? And I think those are all the right questions to kind of create the shifts to put you on a path, maybe in a better direction.
I love that. And, I think probably the two things I'm sitting here thinking as you're talking about that is, one, that idea of, you saw an example and you saw it work relatively well, but did it work for what you wanted, right? Like, your parents took a path and they got somewhere, and for them, that might be exactly where they wanted to go. And that's great. But if where I want to go is not that, then I probably shouldn't follow to a T what it is. I think the second thing is, so much right now people talk about, hey, don't worry about the destination, be focused on the journey, right? And I think the thing that gets missed there is the transferableness of what you're learning on the journey, right? So a lot of people, for me, sports was a big part of my life. I had the opportunity to play basketball in college. And so I tell people all the time, when I went and interviewed for my first job, I didn't have really any good like work experience, but I could tell them how playing basketball taught me to be a leader, how it helped me, handle confrontation and conflict. And it was like, man, we want to hire this guy. Not because I had a good resume or my working ability was so great, but it was because a lot of the things that I had learned in one facet, I was able to translate into a different area of life.
I think you're spot on. And I agree 100% for sure.
Love it. So for you, you and I believe it's Nick get started in a business. Now, did you guys meet when you get started in the business, or did you know each other prior to?
So I got introduced right to direct selling, and really that was the doorway, more so than the channel. It was the doorway into the whole concept of like being an entrepreneur.
Yeah.
Because that was not my family tree, like we talked about. I didn't really have models or mentors or references even around me growing up that I could look to and say, oh, that was even an idea. And then beyond even entrepreneurship as a concept, the whole realm of like personal and professional growth.
Yeah.
Which sounds funny. I did do well in school, but that was because I learned how I learn, and I learned how to memorize, and if you, not everybody has that talent or that ability, but like in the school system, you learn how you learn how to memorize, you can kind of get the grade. It doesn't mean you're learning, right? And it doesn't mean you're interested. And I was never interested in the classroom, but when I started getting turned on to like personal growth, personal development, financial literacy, and I was big in a lot of the things that you teach and talk about, I was just naturally curious. I was like, this is fascinating. And I've learned that curiosity is kind of a doorway or an insight to passion. Like if it's something that you're naturally curious about, when you go down that rabbit hole, it often leads to igniting that whole passion thing. Like when you find people, like what are they really genuinely passionate about? What do they get fired up over, right? What kind of flips that switch, right? Lights that fire? The things we are curious about, we become passionate about. And if we become passionate about something, we end up putting the time and the energy that it takes to learn, to grow, to fall, to fail, to get back up, to do it again. Like all that stuff comes from that fire, which I guess my point is, when you find things that you're curious about, go down that rabbit hole, right? Light that fire. And if you feel that, there's a reason you feel it. There's so many people today that we just suppress that intuition thing, that gut thing. It comes back up because it's in us, and we push it back down because we're stuck in a script or supposed to. It's like, I just learned that the older I get, the more that I start to listen to that feeling, because the more that I realize that feeling is there for a reason. And that feeling is not the same for everybody. We're all unique, and we have those different indicators, but that feeling is that indicator of like what you're designed for, what you're meant for, what you're built for. So anyway, that's what I felt when I first got introduced to the industry and really the concept of entrepreneurship. Did well, actually, just as a sales representative in a company. Thought I was done and retired at a really young age, kind of young and naive, slightly arrogant at that time, and a little too much bravado. We all go through it. And that company went out of business. The rug got pulled out from underneath us, and actually it was from the ashes of a failed company that we started our own. I had met Nick, to answer your question, in that prior company, and we both went through that transition, and we both said it wasn't actually an intention to be like, hey, let's start our own thing. It was more of a how do we salvage or save what at that time we'd spent 5 years of our life, which in hindsight doesn't feel like a lot, but when you're like 20, it's like all your adult life.
Right.
And that was it. So I mean, that was the humble beginnings of the company that we founded in the health and wellness space, and yeah, that was a long venture. I mean, that was most of my career, probably about a 17-year focused run, if you want to call it that. And we went through everything from like the humble, scrappy beginnings to like growing a startup to like raising venture capital to like having a steady, slow growth, good scaling business to being acquired by a multi-billion-dollar public global company, then operating as a public company, which was like a wealth of knowledge and a whole different, lens, to growing internationally and scaling internationally to a phase. Phil, you probably know the story. It's what a lot of people focus on, the highlights, like the phase where we went through and became one of the fastest growing brands out of a recessionary time period, and literally one of the most consumed, weight loss shakes and transformation platforms in the world for a period. To then going through just a disaster of a downturn and what it feels like to go the other direction and have to lead turnarounds, and when everything goes the way that you don't want it to go, and all the scars. So like, I mean, I can tell story on story, but it's definitely a full gambit or a 360-degree view of what an entrepreneur can go through and live through, and all the peaks, the valleys, the ups, the downs, the wins, the losses, the lessons in between. And yeah, I wouldn't trade it for the world. It's been there's been times where it's happier, and there's been times where it was darker for sure. But all the experience, I think, all connects to kind of, what sets you up for the next phase and what gives you that wisdom. So yeah, it's been a fun run for sure.
Yes. So, as I hear you talk, one, I can hear the passion in your voice for it. But the question I have, all right, so you guys had spent 5 years, building, one element of your business, right? So you had a lot of the skills that you needed. But there's a difference between wanting to build a business and have it be, hey, it's good enough, right? Like, this provides the lifestyle that I want. I don't need to scale or make it bigger. And a company that gets acquired by a multi-billion-dollar company. These are two radically different, paths of a business. So talk a little bit about, you finding your passion, or maybe you and Nick finding your passions, and how that helped, really grow and escalate it.
Yeah, it's interesting. So I think, at least for me, call it passion, right? Or a desire, right? Drive, fire. I mean, whatever language you use for like that inner thing that moves us forward. For me, it's evolved, and it continues to evolve. Like I don't think it's a thing. I think it can be a thing for a season.
Yeah.
But for me, that thing has shifted, right? As I go through different seasons of my life or seasons of business. And I think that might be true for most people. I don't know that. In the early days, it's kind of like that told you so mentality.
Yeah.
Like growing up on the traditional script and then making a pivot.
Yeah.
Like Phil, I still have etched in my brain like my party when I graduated college, and I graduated like a top university. I got multiple degrees, minors, did it cum laude, like did the resume thing. And I remember being at like the party after all of that. And for anybody that's finished school, that doesn't matter who you are, who your family is, everybody asks the exact same question, which is, oh, so great. Congratulations. So what are you going to do now?
Yeah.
And I remember being there and saying like, well, I'm going to build a home-based business. can I help you save money on your long distance phone bill?
Yeah.
And I remember itched in my brain are people's facial responses to this guy is absolutely, you graduated what with what and did what and you're doing what? So I think for me that for early phase was a prove to others.
Yeah.
Right. I mean, a told you so.
Yes.
I'm not going to call it a chip because I the chip on the shoulder. I think for a lot of people I worked with, they had a heavy chip on the shoulder.
Yeah.
And that works. I mean, that can create a drive. I mean, you coming from the sports mentality, dude, there's a lot of the best athletes in the world. They got a lot of giant chip on their shoulder. That thing's freaking heavy, and that makes the animal come out, right? So, I think that can be a driver. And if I'm being honest with all of us and myself, I think that was a big first phase. It's interesting. Once you achieve a certain level, that chip becomes lighter because you no longer have something to prove to others.
Right.
You watch the language go from the, oh, it'll never work, you're crazy, to, oh, I always knew you'd make it.
Yeah.
The same people.
Yes.
And what's interesting, I don't know if I've ever shared this kind of publicly, but you talk about that script, and often I get asked, and I talk about the script we did, like the school, the academics, the part of life, because we all start there. But I found myself in the second season falling into a second script while I was aware of the first one, and the second script was like a success script.
Yeah.
Where I fell into, okay, well, to have more, you got to do more, right? You got to go. Then you gotta buy more. You gotta show more. You got the cars. You gotta buy the house. You gotta, for a whole season we had access to the jets. All those things that again we're conditioned, we're supposed to do to show that we're successful. I found myself doing it, falling right into it, not even realizing. I was I'm bagging on one script and proud that I shifted it off the traditional script, not even realizing I just fell into a whole other script of, well, this is what it is to be successful, and this is what you're supposed to do, and this is what makes you happy. And that drove me for a little bit, the things, and don't misunderstand me, because I know it's easy to hear well, yeah, it's easy to say, when you have the resources to go through that phase, and everybody should go through that phase, buy the watch, buy the purse, buy the shoes, buy the car, buy the house, go on the vacation, see the world, do the things. You guys, I would, it's better to be able to do that than not do that, for sure, right? I mean, lifestyle opens up opportunity. But here's my punchline: did it all, wasn't happier, wasn't happier.
Yeah.
More clothes in the closet, more shoes to pick from, right? Options of watches to wear, cars in the driveway, blah, 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 blah. And don't misunderstand me. You guys, all that stuff does create options. I mean, it's not having enough to survive can definitely create unhappiness.
Absolutely.
But having all of that does not create happiness. It's a paradox, right? When I use happiness, like fulfillment, meaning.
Yes.
So anyway, Phil, it's interesting that second phase, the things drove me.
Yeah.
And then I got to all the things, and I realized, I did the same thing again. I fell into another script. And I smile now because once you go through that phase, you start to realize those things aren't what's meaningful. It's not what matters. It's not the things that actually creates real fulfillment. So to answer your question, that could be a driver, right? The things can be the driver. The vision board can be a driver. The goal can be a driver. And it's an effective driver. The applause from other people can be a driver, right?
Yes.
All that stuff can be a driver, and they work. But again, for me, then you go through shifts, and I think you eventually get to a place where it has to move off of others, showing others you can, getting the things so others applaud, right? It has to shift at some point off of others and onto self, right? Where it's really about forget the validation, forget the recognition, forget the chip. And it gets down to, well, what makes you proud of you, right? What is it that you really want to do? What makes you sleep great at night and wake up happy in the morning? It gets into that work. And I think it takes time.
Yeah.
And I wouldn't even just say the success. You know what it takes is it takes, yeah, the wins, but it takes the failures. It takes getting knocked down. It takes getting the scars. It takes going through the mud. It takes all the stuff that actually makes the peaks. And I think those two things combined create the experience that then unlocks maybe a deeper drive, passion, to use your word, to move forward. And that level is, it's no longer about what others say. It's about you. And then eventually it becomes, it's not even about you. It's about you knowing what you can do for others in service of others, not for the applause or the recognition or the approval, but in the service and the contribution. It may sound cheesy and it may sound soft, but like for me, that's the progression of that passion, right? And there's nothing wrong with the phases. So like if you're right now with the chip, like, and that fuels you, run with it. Like run with it as far as fast as you can. If the applause, the stage, the accolades, if that drives you, use it as fuel, but just maybe gain a little bit of wisdom from our conversation that at some point there's going to be like another mountain.
Yes.
And that second mountain or the other mountain isn't going to be about others. It's going to be about self and service. And if you get that, the power there is that's limitless. That's never ending, right? And it's something that you can control. So for me, I don't know if that answers your question, but that's some of the seasons, some of the drive, and some of the lessons, I guess, along the way.
I love it. And I love just how in tune with yourself you are, because I think a lot of people don't ever take the time to start realizing like, oh, the thing that used to motivate me, like, why am I not as excited about this? Or why am I not as motivated as I used to be? And it's like, to your point, you're in a different phase, right? Like that one has worn off and it's no longer as powerful or as motivating as what it once was. You need to kind of reinvent that for yourself.
100%.
So at some point you decide to go on this mission trip, and when you go on the mission trip, there's a important person that you meet in Mexico.
Yeah, I love that you're pulling the moments, you're pulling the dots. Yeah, so I mean, I think on the professional side, we talked about some of those early moments. The why, the introduction, the people. So yeah, my wife and I will be celebrating 24 years together this year. May will be our 10-year wedding anniversary. The women will do the math on that one quick and be like, yeah, we waited a while, but knew it was the right one. And yeah, so yeah, Karis and I met, when we were 19. Went down to a mission trip. I'm faith-based down in Mexicali, Mexico, and it's where we met for the first time, and we've been together ever since. So it is, high school relationships, high school sweethearts. One of those stories that, the more I share it, it gets the from the the women and the what from the guys. I mean, it's rare today.
Right, absolutely.
But yeah, I guess all of these kind of connect the dots of like, I'm big on loyalty, and it's been awesome to go through all the ups and downs we're talking about professionally, but with an awesome supporter by my side through all of it, and family values are high on my list, and love the life we're creating together for sure.
So as the buy challenge, takes off, and as that grows, you do get to that point where you're like, I don't know that this is what I meant to do long term, or continue to be owners. So talk a little bit about selling that. I think for a lot of people that's a really difficult decision to make that transition, because in a way it's like a child, right? It's like, man, I started from infancy and I've grown it to what it is.
Yeah, it's interesting too, and it's an identity conversation.
Yes.
And it's so funny because like the me of today would not only maybe makes different decisions, but the overall energy or feeling around what I had during those phases would be just so dramatically different because of what I've been through since then. But yeah, when we quote unquote sold to a parent $1 billion public company, the intention, at least my intention, was never to exit. And this might sound super funny because now in business today, right? When you're like a more traditional entrepreneur, and I'm, I'm in a lot of the entrepreneurial circles. I'm a part of YPO, and for those of you guys that know the YPO organization, amazing organization. I get a ton of value of it. I'm in the Santa Monica Bay chapter out here, and I'm around just amazing entrepreneurs that are always starting new things. And these are groups of like some of the biggest entrepreneurs and executives and CEOs in the world. And the conversation from the get-go a lot of times is, well, like, this is my plan to exit. Like that, you start a business to build a value to get an exit meaning a liquidity, right? Event, turn it into value. Like that's actually the part of business. Phil, I laugh. Nobody ever taught me that. So like when I'm an entrepreneur, like I didn't know that. Like when I'm building a company, I never in a million years, like that was never the plan.
Right.
And here I am at 31 years old, and our company at that point was valued at about $970 million. So it was almost $1 billion company I'm leading with my partners I was 31 years old. And we exited, but the point, or at least my intention of that partnership was to go to a new level. The reason we partnered, and I use the term partnered, right? But, we're acquired by a $1 billion public global direct selling company was, well, help us become one. Take us how to grow internationally. And so that was my intention from the get-go. And it did that, right? Yeah. Proximity to brilliant entrepreneurs, right? Lessons on I didn't have any work background. I got started in this industry at 19.
Right.
The only job I'd ever had was a high school pool lifeguard. That was my work resume, right? I cut my teeth and learned the skill doing it, living it, and then creating it. And then learning as I go, like literally learning and leading at the same time. And I found myself, like I said, late 20s, early 30s. It's almost $1 billion valuation. I'm hiring these giant executives, like people that were way older, had way longer CVs and bios than I did. So there's a lot of lessons through all of that. So it was a learning phase, and learning how to grow a company and scale a company and being able to hire and lead and learn from brilliant minds. Was an amazing phase. But I guess to answer your question, my point was never to leave.
Yeah.
And I remember going through the phases of growth and as the company continued to get acquired and realizing, well, no, but this is like a part of me. Like this is what I do, and being more than emotionally attached.
Nice.
And so, yeah, as an entrepreneur story, there's a lot there, but getting the acquisition or getting acquired was never like an exit. It was a next step or a way to level up. Yeah. And, the story, there's a lot, we won't go into all the details here, but, we ended up buying it back. So we ended up through a whole series of events, actually becoming worth more than the parent company was worth and would be able to honor. And after, trying a bunch of different strategies, they wanted to pursue IPOs, going public, spinning this, all these things that we just didn't feel was right for the community. Given some of the climate that was going on at that time, we actually ended up just buying it back. So we forgave what most would spend their life building for. I mean, legacy changing wealth. Right.
Yeah.
We walked from, meaning myself and my partners, we literally walked from, out of us saying that wasn't the right move for our community. And if I were to be really honest, Phil, out of us saying too, like, this is our identity. We didn't want to give that up. So anyway, we ended up buying it back and went through a series of events and, a massive downturn, turnaround, rebirth in international markets. And then eventually, actually the brand getting acquired again, which landed me alongside my current partners and in the direction of Prove It and everything that I'm doing. So again, it's an interesting question. I don't spend a lot of time on regret. Like it's not a word I really entertain in my vocabulary. Yep. Because you can't change it, right? You can learn from things, right? And I'm of the belief that, at least I feel, whenever I'm in a scenario, if I'm doing things with the right intention, to me, intention matters. Yeah. And if I'm doing things with the right intention, based on the information I have at that time, that's the right decision. That's the right move, and you can't go back and say, well, what if this, what if that, with the benefit of hindsight or things changing. It's just, no, if you do things with the right intention, and right intention means not just for you, but those that rely on you and those that you depend on you. And you do it with the right information. That's the best thing you can do in that moment. That is quote unquote right. And, there's a lot of decisions that had I done differently, the numbers in a bank account would be maybe a lot larger, than they are today. But I don't know that I would trade that for the world, because the lessons and the experience and the things that have gone along the way and the journey, like you say, I think is more priceless. It's taken me a minute to get to that, but I do truly believe that today. So anyway, those are some of the lessons and the learnings through the ups, the downs, the transactions. And I guess it is a kind of a crazy story, because I've actually really only done one thing for 24 years. If you really think about it, I joined a company as a sales rep that went out of business, acquired the assets and founded a company, grew that company, sold that company, bought that company back, rebirthed that company, and then merged that company.
Yeah.
So it's been 24 years, different jerseys, different brands, different perspectives, different seasons. But I guess it goes back to that loyalty thing. I've kind of done one thing and reinvented along the way.
Bunch of different iterations, but yes, you are mastering it. So now for you, you guys started the #1 venture capital company. Talk a little bit about, what the mission is behind that. And really, once again, I know people that are listening right now are hearing how passionate you are about helping others, serving others. So talk a little bit about, kind of what birthed that and what that's all
that was
about.
really a venture from some of my partners saying, okay, well, we're in a season where we have resources and have some experience. So how do we maybe direct some of those resources and connect with amazing entrepreneurs, as an investment vehicle? I'd say more so than even like the investment vehicle, but along the same spirit. That's why I do what I do every day. Outside of that vehicle and it's what I love. It's why actually we're talking right now. We just met.
Yeah.
I did some research and some homework. I love what you're doing, what you're bringing to the world. I appreciated the invite. And we're doing this for no other reason other than to add value, and maybe the message lands on the right person at the right moment and it makes a difference in some way.
Yes.
And that's it. So there is no other intention. And that's kind of what drives a lot of what I do and why I do it. It's a way to, it's not only pay it forward. It's really a way to say, okay, I believe in people. I do believe that people were created for a reason. I believe people have gifts and talents. I also believe a lot of those gifts and talents people are blind to because of the script that they have had around them. And if through experience or sharing a little bit of perspective or just having a relationship, I can just say something or be a part of something that just wakes somebody up, have that aha moment like I had when I was 19, that why moment.
Yeah.
And then gets them maybe on a path toward their gifts, their talents, right? Their passions, their fuel. And I think that person's going to be better off. I think they're going to be happier and more fulfilled. And a person that is in alignment with what they were created for, not only is going to be a better person, they're going to make a bigger impact. And that impact might be their family or their community or their neighborhood or their school or their team or their company, or they might be a person that changes the world. I don't care how big, but that's definitely the heart of what drives me and why I do what I do every day. And honestly, why we're spending time here together.
You bet. Now, this is something that I think, kind of like you commented earlier, thinking about, man, sports from the point of being a parent instead of being the athlete or the participant. Something I'd be curious is, how cognizant are you on the script that you're portraying for kids and what they see, right? Because I think, that could be an interesting dynamic of like, well, I'd like them to kind of do it the way I did it because I know how fruitful it's been to me, but they might be like, I want to be like grandma, I want to be a principal somewhere. So, how do you kind of do the script for your kids and, help be aware of the way you're living?
I mean, Phil, I don't know. And I'm figuring it out every day. That's just the truth of the matter. And I don't want to pretend like I have all the answers. I'm a collection of experiences, and I try to be, like you said, cognizant, try to be aware, mindful, right. Of how, I am of the opinion that, well, a set script may have worked for the past. And you said it, right? I mean, let's be direct. Like, it might have worked in our parents' generation, worked from the definition of if they followed it, they got the outcome that they expected, right?
Yes.
And it might have worked. For a lot of people, it did work. I think this is just opinion. I think where the world's at today, there is no longer one script. Like there is just not. There's too much shift going on. There's too much evolution going on. The rate of change and velocity is too fast. I just don't think it works, my personal opinion. So to me, it's not about teaching my son or kids or a future generation like what to do. You and I were taught what to do. I think today it's about building, you know, the mental health, building the self-awareness, right? Building the mindfulness for people to ask their own questions on like, well, how, and I think even deeper than how, well, why? You know, why first, then how, then what, to use Simon Sinek's little framework there. I think that's the approach. Love it. Personally for today. So I guess to answer your question, I don't prescribe anything. I right now I'm in a phase, right or wrong, where I want to expose my kids to as much as possible. And then find what they're curious about, right? Find what excites them, and then support and reinforce the things that excite them, not the things that excite me. Which is easier said than done, right? As parents, and you know, parenting's a hard thing, and I don't think there is a right or wrong way. And I am not here to claim that I'm, you know, an excellent one. I'm just another one that's doing the best they can with the perspective we have. But that would be, I guess, my philosophy on where I'm at today.
Yes. Well, Blake, I appreciate you, man. I could keep doing this for the next 9 hours, but there's just no way we can do that. I know you have things to get done, but I just want to say thanks so much for sharing your journey and your story. And, you know, I'm excited to just continue to see all the amazing things you're going to do. And we'll probably have to do this again in like 2 or 3 years and see what other pivotal moments have led to that point in time for you.
Phil, I appreciate it. Thanks again for the opportunity. I admire and respect the initiative and the outreach, and not only the invite, but finding people and asking great questions and coming prepared and extracting, you know, hopefully some of those moments they can add value to your listeners, and I look forward to maintaining the relationship and keeping the conversation going. So appreciate the time.
Thank you, my man.